Mike Carter meticulously completed the final batch of documents Ethan had provided. These papers were crucial for managing one of the firm's largest portfolios, which fell under Mike's supervision. The portfolio in question belonged to Robert Caldwell, a billionaire investor and entrepreneur, famously nicknamed Rob Caldwell. Rob had a reputation for using his immense wealth to execute hostile takeovers, buying up stock to seize control of companies. Once he succeeded, he would quickly liquidate assets to inflate the value of his investments, often persuading others to join in while prioritizing his gain over their potential losses. Anyone left damaged in the wake of his schemes? That wasn't his concern. Mike, acting as both Rob's lawyer and legal conscience, managed to keep him compliant with regulations enforced by the SEC and other federal bodies that kept close tabs on characters like Caldwell. Mike's efforts ensured that Rob could grow his wealth exponentially, which benefited not only Caldwell but also the firm of Carter, Bennett, and Foster-Inken. Meanwhile, Ethan was making impressive progress in handling the portfolios Mike had been gradually transitioning to him. With just 2 weeks left in the process, Ethan was on track to take over full responsibility for Mike's regular clients. The only exceptions were Mike's high-profile, special clients. Apart from Ethan, Laura, Bennett, and Daniel Foster, no one was aware of Mike's impending retirement. It was a decision Mike had wrestled with, but he reminded himself that it was time to step back and reclaim his personal life. After all, he had poured decades into building the firm. Alongside Laura and Daniel, Mike had transformed a modest storefront law office into one of the most prestigious and powerful firms in Columbus, Ohio. But success came at a price. Mike's relentless work ethic had taken a toll on his personal life, particularly his marriage to Samantha and their family. Last month, Mike and Samantha celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They had 2 college-age children, Ryan, 19, and Emily, 18, both thriving in their academic pursuits. Though their life was comfortable by any material measure, Mike couldn't ignore the growing emotional void in his marriage. Samantha had grown distant, and her lack of interest in their intimacy gnawed at him. Mike's own passion for their physical connection remained strong, but Samantha had brushed off her declining libido as a temporary phase, promising to address it with her doctor during her next visit, an appointment she had repeatedly postponed for nearly a year. Mike's attempts to revive their love life had proven futile, and he eventually stopped bringing up the subject. His frustration simmered silently, exacerbated by Samantha's frequent trips to her hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. Samantha explained her frequent visits as necessary to help her aging mother and support her sister Jessica, who had remained in Mansfield after a messy divorce. Jessica, now living alone, appreciated Samantha's company and assistance during these trips, which had become a regular biweekly routine over the past 6 months. Samantha would leave on Thursday mornings and return late Sunday nights. Although she maintained a semblance of connection by calling Mike every evening at 9 and keeping her phone available, these trips left Mike feeling increasingly isolated. This morning, Samantha left for another visit, leaving Mike to face another weekend alone. Despite his disappointment, Mike had told her he was working on a surprise that would be ready in a couple of weeks. He even mentioned that Laura was involved, hoping to spark some curiosity, or perhaps jealousy, to keep Samantha interested enough to stay home. But, as expected, her reaction was lukewarm, and she returned to packing without pressing for details. Resigned, Mike kissed her goodbye and headed to work, knowing she'd be gone before he returned. Later that afternoon, Mike finished up in his office and stopped by Hannah's desk, his trusted secretary, to finalize the day's tasks. Then, he strolled down the hallway's plush carpeting to Laura's office. Knocking once, he pushed the door open, an informal gesture that the partners had come to accept as his trademark. Greeting Laura warmly, Mike suggested they call it a day and unwind over drinks. Laura declined, mentioning she had plans to attend her son's school play with her husband, Mark. Their son, Mark Jr., had the starring role in Pirates of Doom. Mike teased her about the play, joking about the inevitable bias all parents feel toward their children's performances. Laura laughed, agreeing wholeheartedly. At 46, Laura had been happily married for a decade, and her balance of work and family life was something Mike admired. She reassured him that the firm's latest project was progressing smoothly and that Ethan's involvement wasn't necessary yet. However, Laura did express concerns about Mike's upcoming retirement. She admitted she hoped to convince him to stay, acknowledging his pivotal role in the firm's rise to prominence. Mike countered with kind words, praising her leadership and confidence in the younger generation. He specifically highlighted Ethan's dedication and hinted at the possibility of promoting Sophia Ellis to partner in the near future. Laura, impressed by Mike's faith in their team, agreed that Sophia and Ethan showed great potential. She mentioned that Arjun, another rising star in the firm, would also attend the upcoming retirement party. Mike smiled, pleased with the firm's bright future, and bid Laura good night, promising to see her tomorrow. As he drove home to his sprawling estate in the Columbus suburbs, Mike's thoughts lingered on the quietness that awaited him. His 5-acre property boasted a luxurious 5,000-square-foot home, complete with a hot tub spilling into a pool, a cabana, 2 tennis courts, and vibrant gardens blooming with flowers that added splashes of color through summer and autumn. Yet, with his children away at college and Samantha's absence becoming routine, the once vibrant house now felt hollow. After Ryan and Emily left for school, Samantha had let go of their cook and maid, leaving Mike to navigate the silence of the largely empty home. Recognizing the house was far too large for just the two of them, Samantha had suggested downsizing a few times. Although she agreed they hadn't fully committed to the idea, she proposed waiting another couple of years before making a final decision. Mike pulled into their spacious 4-car garage, stepped into the kitchen, and threw a frozen dinner into the microwave. As it heated, he headed upstairs to change into something more comfortable for the evening. While heading back down the stairs, the landline rang. Mike hoped it was about one of his ads, as it was too early for Samantha's nightly call. Picking up the phone, he was pleased to hear from a potential buyer interested in his 32-foot powered sailboat, which he kept moored at Lake Erie during the summer and fall and stored in a facility during the winter. The conversation was productive. The buyer, who had already taken the boat out for a trial run with the marina owner standing in for Mike, agreed to send a cashier's check to the post office box Mike provided. Once the payment was received, the title, which the buyer had already reviewed, would be ready for pickup at the marina. With everything in place, Mike felt a sense of relief. Samantha, who had always disliked the boat and hadn't joined him on the water in years, would be thrilled it was sold. With the boat off his hands and his Jaguar and Audi promised to the highest bidders, Mike felt he had checked off most of his retirement preparations. The house might take longer to sell, but he and Samantha could comfortably move into the smaller bungalow he had already started furnishing. Any additional items could be bought as needed. Mike ate his frozen dinner mechanically, barely tasting it, and decided to unwind with some mindless TV. Grabbing a cold Miller Lite, he settled into the entertainment room and chose to watch adult content. As the movie played, he found himself critiquing the lack of originality. The actors performed the same predictable routines, their lack of creativity failing to stir even mild interest. Shaking his head at the monotony, he turned his attention elsewhere, avoiding any temptation to engage further. At precisely 9 o'clock, Samantha called. Mike answered, asking if her trip had gone smoothly. She reassured him it had been uneventful and mentioned that her mother was doing slightly better, though her sister Jessica seemed stressed. Samantha floated the idea of staying an extra day to help Jessica, asking if Mike would be okay with it. Despite the knot forming in his stomach, Mike brushed off the feeling and told her to do whatever she thought was best. To mask his unease, he mentioned that work was keeping him busy and how quiet it felt without her. When Mike noted how little she had packed for the trip, Samantha explained she had left enough belongings in Mansfield during previous visits to make do. She then shifted the conversation to the surprise Mike had hinted at earlier, expressing some curiosity. Mike, mildly surprised by her interest, assured her everything was on track, with Laura finishing up her part. Samantha promised to call again the following night and ended the conversation with a simple good night. Mike noticed she didn't reciprocate his "I love you" with anything beyond that. Smiling wryly, he chalked it up to her focus on her family. Reflecting on the dynamics of Samantha's family, Mike felt no love lost for her mother or sister. Her mother's constant meddling and Jessica's reputation, tarnished by her affair during her marriage, left Mike indifferent toward them. Sighing, he resigned himself to the solitude of the weekend. To occupy his time, he called Ryan and Emily, chatting with them for over an hour and reminding them of their upcoming visit in 2 weeks. Afterward, Mike drifted into a restless sleep on the couch, waking in the middle of the night with a stiff neck. He moved to the bed and fell into a dreamless slumber, something he welcomed after weeks of unpleasant dreams. The next 2 weeks passed predictably. Mike focused on wrapping up his remaining cases and ensuring Ethan was fully prepared to take over. He spent most of the second week calling clients to inform them of his impending retirement. The majority congratulated him and were open to working with Ethan, though a few wanted additional reassurances from Laura or Daniel. Mike promptly arranged for those calls. By the time Samantha left for Mansfield on Thursday, Mike had successfully kept his retirement plans under wraps. Samantha rarely inquired about his work anymore, so concealing the details hadn't been difficult. She had also seemed to forget about the surprise, and Mike decided not to bring it up until Sunday morning when she would call to let him know if she was returning as scheduled or staying an extra day. Friday marked Mike's final day at the firm, a whirlwind of activity. He worked with Hannah to tidy up the office, transferring files and responsibilities to Ethan. After making a few more calls, he instructed Hannah to route all new inquiries to Ethan moving forward. Since Ethan was taking over Hannah as his secretary, the transition was seamless. In the midst of his tasks, Mike checked in with Laura to confirm everything was ready for his retirement party that evening. Laura assured him it was all set before heading to the courthouse. She promised to return in time for the event at the Radisson Hotel. Although everyone understood that Samantha wouldn't be attending, it didn't dampen the excitement surrounding the celebration. It was shaping up to be a memorable send-off. After lunch, Mike set off to tackle a series of essential tasks, wrapping everything up by mid-afternoon. By 3 p.m., the final papers for the sale of the house were signed, and movers were already hard at work. Their commitment was clear: finish the job by late Saturday afternoon. Once the movers completed their task, a cleaning crew Mike had hired would step in, with strict instructions to leave the house spotless by the end of the evening. To motivate them, Mike had promised a generous bonus for timely completion. The realtors assured Mike that the for sale sign would be installed in the front yard by the following day. They had already compiled a list of interested buyers eager to begin viewing the property on Monday. Mike had strategically priced the house to ensure a quick sale, satisfying both his need for efficiency and the realtors' expectations. His last task that afternoon was confirming that all financial arrangements were securely in place. Over the years, Mike and Samantha had maintained separate accounts in addition to their joint ones. Each carried only one credit card, a rule Mike insisted upon to avoid accumulating credit balances. Samantha, ever prudent with money, managed their household accounts skillfully. She was aware of Mike's professional accounts but never pried into the firm's private finances. As time passed, she seemed to forget about their existence altogether. In preparation for his retirement, Mike closed all joint accounts and transferred the remaining funds into a new brokerage account under his sole name. For the time being, he planned to handle their shared finances in cash until they settled into their new life. The couple's next home wouldn't even be in the United States. Mike had quietly moved their accounts offshore and opened an international bank account with branches in Europe and South America. He was confident that Samantha's financial savvy would help her adapt quickly to this new arrangement. Finally, Mike confirmed that their travel arrangements were secure. 2 tickets to a luxurious Costa Rican resort awaited them, where they would spend the next several months enjoying sun-drenched beaches, sailing, horseback riding, and ultimate relaxation. Mike had taken a solo trip to the resort earlier to ensure it met his high standards. Satisfied, he asked Hannah to finalize the bookings and double-check all the details. Everything was aligned for a seamless transition after his retirement. Over the years, Mike's career had afforded him significant financial success. Representing high-profile clients in complex cases, he commanded premium fees and amassed considerable wealth. Thanks to his legal expertise, he had moved much of his fortune into offshore accounts, entirely within the bounds of the law but discreetly beyond the reach of U.S. tax codes and courts. These accounts, unknown to Samantha, contained sums that would astonish her if she ever found out. Samantha had periodically suggested that Mike retire, frustrated by the long hours he devoted to work. However, the topic had been dropped over the past year, and Mike believed that his decision to finally step away would delight her. He kept his plans a secret, intending to announce everything during her Sunday morning call. By then, the stage would be fully set. Friday evening, Mike attended his retirement party at the Radisson Hotel. The event was a lively celebration, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt conversations. Mike made a point to dance with all the women and swap stories with the men, recounting some of the most intriguing cases of his career. Ethan hovered nearby for much of the evening, soaking in Mike's wisdom and ensuring he didn't miss any final advice. Mike held Ethan in high regard, seeing him as an invaluable future asset to the firm. Laura and Daniel, who were privy to Mike's broader plans, had been sworn to secrecy. As his attorneys, they played key roles in executing the finer details. Laura, in particular, had taken pleasure in helping Mike orchestrate his surprise for Samantha. As they danced, she confirmed that everything was on track, having documented every check and transaction to ensure a flawless execution. When Mike shared his plans for Costa Rica, Laura teased him sarcastically but offered her genuine congratulations. Mike laughed and suggested Laura and her husband, Mark, should consider taking a similar step someday. Laura replied that she enjoyed her work too much to quit just yet, though she promised to pass Mike's regards to Daniel for being excluded from their secretive planning. Mike stayed at the party until nearly midnight before finally heading home. Back at the house, Mike noticed he had missed a call from Samantha. Listening to her voicemail, he heard her explain that she would be staying at her mother's house that night. She asked Mike not to call, as her mother needed rest and was sleeping. Samantha promised to call the next night and asked Mike to make sure he'd be home. Predictably, Mike knew she wouldn't call again that evening after leaving her message. He spent the rest of the night carefully packing his and Samantha's belongings. Determined to avoid unnecessary trips after the movers finished the following day, Mike meticulously organized everything, ensuring the process would run smoothly. By the time he finished, every detail was accounted for. Early the next morning, Mike planned to transfer everything to the bungalow and redirect all calls to his new cell phone. Before turning in for the night, Mike made one final call to confirm the last piece of his surprise was set in motion. Exhausted from the party but feeling accomplished, he fell into a deep sleep, hoping nothing would derail his carefully laid plans. Saturday arrived, bringing the final wave of packing and moving as the furniture was transported from their home. Everything was coming together seamlessly. Though a touch of sadness tugged at him, Mike shrugged it off and left the movers to finish their work. He headed back to the bungalow, where his kids were due to arrive around noon. Mike planned to fill them in on his retirement and the bigger surprises he had kept hidden. While he had hinted at stepping away from work, he hadn't mentioned Costa Rica or any of the other changes. Now was the moment to bring them up to speed and secure their promise not to call Samantha and spoil the plan. When Ryan and Emily arrived, Mike greeted them warmly and invited them inside. He wasted no time, sitting them down to explain everything. Keeping it concise yet clear, he answered their questions and expanded on details as they asked for clarification. Predictably, neither of them was thrilled about the drastic changes, but Mike reassured them that their college tuition was fully covered and that they'd always have a home, wherever that turned out to be. He emphasized that retiring was a decision he and Samantha had agreed upon and that the timing was right for both of them. The kids expressed a desire to talk to their mother, but Mike insisted they wait until Sunday night when she returned home. Reluctantly, they agreed. That evening, the three of them went out for dinner and kept quiet as Mike took Samantha's usual 9 p.m. call. True to form, she kept it brief, confirming she'd be home as planned without mentioning an extended stay. Mike took her at her word, still expecting her back the following evening. After the call, the kids revisited their concerns about Mike's plans, wanting reassurance that he was certain about his decisions. Mike affirmed that everything was proceeding exactly as he intended and that he was at peace with his choice. Later, Ryan and Emily settled into the bungalow's spare room with its twin beds, while Mike made a final round of calls. The movers had completed their work, and the cleaning crew confirmed that the house was spotless and ready for showings. Satisfied, Mike turned in for the night, exhausted but feeling a sense of accomplishment. Sunday dawned as a quiet, uneventful day. With most of the work behind him, Mike had little to do but wait. A visit to the house revealed everything was in perfect order, the movers and cleaners having done an impeccable job. By mid-morning, he was back at the bungalow, anticipating Samantha's call to say she was heading home. He expected her to phone between 10 and 10:30, as she usually did. When the call came, Mike answered immediately. His voice carried an edge of nervousness as he asked if she was ready to start for home. Samantha hesitated before replying, her tone strained. She explained that she wanted to stay a few more days to help her sister, Jessica, with errands and give her extra time to get things done. Her careful delivery suggested she was bracing for Mike's reaction, fully aware of how much he disliked these sudden extensions. As her words registered, Mike felt a surge of emotion that he had been suppressing for months. The anger he had so carefully controlled began to break free. She wanted to stay longer. Why? He already knew. He'd known for over 3 months, long enough to plan his next steps. The time for restraint was over. Voice tight with suppressed fury, Mike sarcastically told her she was welcome to stay, suggesting she make the most of her time with Thomas, her lover. The name dropped like a grenade, shattering the facade he'd maintained. His voice rose as he continued, accusing her of carrying on not just with Thomas, but also with another man, James. Mike vented months of pent-up frustration, yelling about how he'd had to pretend he didn't know for so long. On the other end of the line, silence reigned, broken only by a single sob before the call abruptly disconnected. Staring at the phone in his hand, Mike felt blindsided. Samantha had hung up. The abruptness left him stunned, his anger with nowhere to go. Shaking, he set the phone down on the table, his hands trembling with leftover rage. Slumping into a chair, Mike tried to process what had just happened. The room seemed unnaturally quiet until another phone rang sharply, startling him. It was the disposable phone he'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Without voicemail to deflect the call, it kept ringing, forcing him to answer. Finally, he picked it up, managing only a terse yes. Whatever anger he had left fizzled out, replaced by numbness. He had anticipated a screaming match, a cathartic confrontation that would let him expel all the pain and betrayal he'd been carrying. But the abrupt end to the call had extinguished his rage, leaving a cold emptiness in its wake. Jessica's angry voice cut through his haze. She demanded to know what he had said to Samantha, accusing him of causing her sister's near-hysterical state. Jessica's tone bristled with blame and concern for Samantha. Mike, however, redirected his resentment toward her, seeing Jessica as complicit in Samantha's betrayal. Sarcasm dripping from his voice, he replied that he had merely told Samantha to stay as long as she liked, with Thomas. Jessica sputtered, attempting to defend her sister, but Mike wasn't interested in listening. As far as he was concerned, they were both equally guilty. The confrontation with Jessica brought no relief, only a deepening sense of weariness. Mike ended the call abruptly, tossing the disposable phone onto the table and leaning back in his chair. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The plan he had meticulously crafted over the past 3 months was no longer about surprises or calculated moves. It was about regaining control of his life, starting now. Mike accused both Jessica and Samantha of being involved with Thomas and James Norton, going as far as detailing their meetings at a motel. His anger simmered just beneath the surface, his voice tense as he tried to keep from shouting at Jessica. She pleaded with him to let Samantha explain, insisting that things weren't as they seemed. Jessica called it a stupid mistake and admitted she was equally at fault for encouraging Samantha. "Mike, it wasn't what you think," Jessica stammered. "You have to give her a chance to explain. Please, don't do anything drastic. Just wait until she gets home." But Mike had heard enough. His tone remained firm as he revealed, "Someone will be here when she gets back, but it won't be me." He left no doubt about his intentions as he accused Samantha of throwing away their marriage, dismissing any excuses Jessica could offer. Mike flatly stated that Samantha clearly wanted to continue her affair with Thomas. Jessica's pleas grew more desperate, but Mike was unmoved. He informed her that he had already spoken to Ryan and Emily, telling them everything about Samantha's so-called weekends caring for her mother. Jessica gasped, her voice rising in disbelief. "You told the kids?" "Mike, how could you?" she cried. "They deserve to know the truth," Mike said, his voice hard. "And they handled it better than I expected. Better than you or Samantha, that's for sure." Jessica tried one last time to reason with him, asking for hope and a chance to fix things. But Mike cut her off, repeating with icy resolve that it wasn't him who discarded the family. It was Samantha and Jessica. He ended the call by sarcastically suggesting she say goodbye to their mother for him. "I'm sure she's laughing her skinny buns off about all of this," he added, the words dripping with bitterness. With that, Mike disconnected and set the phone on the table. He stood in silence for a moment, surveying the bungalow. The small space, modest and quiet, was worlds away from the life he had shared with Samantha. "She'll love it," he muttered to himself, the irony clear in his voice. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped his lips as he turned away. Mike methodically turned off the lights and placed the spare keys on the table beside a letter addressed to Samantha. Then, he walked out the front door, pulling it shut behind him. Sliding into his rental car, he started the engine and drove off, leaving behind the house, the lies, and the pain. When he arrived at Hannah's apartment, she was waiting outside with her luggage. She smiled brightly as Mike pulled up, her 3 suitcases neatly stacked beside her. Mike stepped out, loading her bags into the car before opening the passenger door for her. "Ready?" he asked as she climbed in, her smile lingering as she glanced up at him. "More than ready," she said. "Do you know how hard it's been? Seeing you every day at work, not being able to touch you or even talk to you properly." Samantha didn't know what she had, but I did. "I'm just lucky enough to have found you when she threw you away." As they drove, Hannah opened up about her feelings, mentioning how she had sensed something was off when Jessica encouraged Samantha to extend her stay. The way she said it, Hannah explained, made it clear there was more going on. Like Samantha spending more time with Thomas and James was some kind of game. She admitted feeling a fleeting pang of guilt, but said it quickly gave way to relief. Her connection with Mike felt genuine, unlike the lies and chaos Samantha had left in her wake. Hannah smiled at him again, her confidence growing as they drove away from the turmoil. Meanwhile, back in Mansfield, Samantha was unraveling. Mike's words echoed in her mind, each accusation piercing deeper than the last. He knew. He had known for months. The weight of that realization made her stomach turn. Her hands shook as she grabbed her car keys and bolted out of Jessica's kitchen, ignoring her sister's protests. She had to get home. She had to fix this. Thomas and James had been nothing but distractions, meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Mike was the one who mattered, the only man she had ever truly loved. The drive to Columbus, which usually took close to 4 hours, became a desperate race against time. Samantha pushed her car to its limits, ignoring speed limits and the possibility of getting pulled over. She couldn't let Mike leave. She had to reach him before it was too late. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, "I'll never see Thomas or James again. I'll cut off Jessica if I have to. Anything to fix this. Anything to keep him." As the miles sped by, Samantha tried to imagine what she would say. She would confess everything, beg for his forgiveness, and promise to change. Thomas and James had meant nothing, she told herself. They had simply been a way to escape from the monotony she felt. But none of that mattered anymore. All that mattered was Mike. Her resolve hardened as she neared Columbus, but deep in her heart, she feared the truth. It might already be too late. Over and over during the drive, I rehearsed the words I would use to persuade Mike not to throw me away. The explanation I'd crafted in my mind felt fragile, but it was all I had. I had been seduced by Jessica and her lifestyle, by her smooth assurances that stepping outside my marriage could fix what was broken. She had told me that the lack of my lovemaking drive was a problem, one I could overcome by letting go. Her advice had been insidious. To be with someone I didn't have to please or care about, to rekindle the part of me I had lost. She convinced me it would reawaken my passion, and that Mike would benefit in the end. It wasn't meant to be an affair, I told myself. It was supposed to be a cure, a temporary measure to bring me back to my husband. But that plan had twisted into something I hadn't expected. I was seduced not just by the physical connection, but by the forbidden thrill of it all. The lust, the danger, the reckless abandon. It had taken over, blinding me to what I was risking. It was supposed to help us, I whispered to the empty car, trying to believe the words. I can make him understand. He'll listen. He has to. But as the miles stretched on, doubt crept into my mind. 100 miles into the drive, a different question clawed at me. The one I knew Mike would ask. Why didn't that lust ever carry over? Why, in the 6 months since this began, had we not made love once? I had no answer. None that made sense, at least. The truth was as damning as the question itself. I couldn't even convince myself, let alone Mike. My mind scrambled for an explanation as the miles melted away, and I pushed the car faster, the engine whining under the strain of my urgency. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I slammed on the brakes, my heart dropping at the sight before me. 4 cars were parked there. 2 of them belonged to Ryan and Emily, and seeing them filled me with a wave of confusion and dread. What were they doing here? The other 2 cars were unfamiliar, and their presence only deepened the knot in my stomach. I steered around them, pulling onto the grass in my haste, and threw the car into park. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I clambered out and ran toward the house. A man I didn't recognize stepped out of one of the unfamiliar cars, moving to intercept me before I could reach the door. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. I ignored him, fumbling for my keys as I reached the front door. My hand shook as I slid the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again and again, the realization dawning slowly and painfully. The lock had been changed. No, I cried, throwing the key onto the porch in frustration. I pounded on the door with my fists, ignoring the sharp pain as the force of my blows reverberated through my hands. "Mike, let me in. Mike, please." I screamed, tears streaming down my face. The man from the car stood silently nearby, waiting until I had exhausted myself. When I finally turned toward him, trembling and broken, he stepped forward and handed me an envelope. "You are served, madam," he said, his voice low but professional. I stared at the envelope in his outstretched hand, barely comprehending his words. Before I could speak, he produced a second, smaller envelope. "These are the keys to your new residence. The address is inside, along with the deed and all necessary documentation. The property is yours, free and clear." Numbly, I accepted both envelopes, my mind struggling to keep up. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a third, a legal-sized white envelope. "This contains several checks representing the balances of your former savings and checking accounts, which have now been closed. The proceeds from the sale of this house will be transferred to you once the sale is complete. Everything is detailed in the divorce paperwork inside." His words hit me like blows, each one driving the weight of my situation deeper into my chest. Finally, he handed me a business card. "This is the contact information for your husband's attorney, Ms. Laura Bennett." At that name, anger flared briefly within me, but it fizzled out almost as quickly. Laura had always been a problem in my mind, a wedge I had used to make Mike feel guilty, even though I knew deep down it was baseless. Now, all those petty grievances seemed laughably small in the face of what I had done. I glanced up and froze as I saw Laura herself walking toward me from one of the other cars. Her expression was calm but unyielding, her presence commanding. "Hello, Samantha," she said, her voice cool and clipped. "You're not looking your best today." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Laura continued, her tone sharp and matter-of-fact. "Mike asked me to handle things in his absence, and I'm here to do just that. In case you're wondering, he retired on Friday. We had a big party to celebrate. It was wonderful, too bad you missed it. But then again, you had more important things to do, didn't you?" Her words landed like daggers, each one sharper than the last. She went on, detailing the arrangements Mike had made. The house had been transferred into his name via a power of attorney I had signed long ago. It was now listed for sale, with the proceeds designated for me. He had also purchased and furnished a bungalow, which was already in my name. Finally, Laura delivered the final blow. "Mike has left the country. I believe it's his intention not to return for quite some time. He's with someone else now, someone who cares for him. He will not speak to you or entertain any attempts at reconciliation. The divorce is final as far as he's concerned." I stared at her, gasping for breath as the weight of her words crushed me. My legs gave out and I sank to the ground, clutching the envelopes as tears streamed down my face. I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. Mike was gone, and with him, the foundation of everything I cared about. When I turned toward Ryan and Emily, I saw nothing but anger and disappointment on their faces. Their disgust was palpable, and it broke me even further. As I fell to my knees in front of them, my grief poured out in uncontrollable sobs. Ryan helped me to my feet, but there was no comfort in his touch, only cold indifference. Emily stood with her arms crossed, her face a mirror of her brother's disdain. Their rejection was more painful than anything I had ever felt. In losing Mike, I had also lost my children's love and respect. I had destroyed my family, and there was no undoing it. As I looked back at the house, the place where we had built our lives together, I realized it was no longer mine. Nothing was. What have I done? I thought. How could I have been so blind? But no answer came. Only the suffocating weight of my regret.